officially have what I'd consider not necessarily the first bad episode of the show. I think bad is kind of a strong word for this, but it's certainly the least interesting episode so far. To be honest, there wasn't really a lot that happened in this one, and the stuff that did happen felt kind of unnecessary to the plot. For instance, there's the scene where they're talking about mithril, which is this extremely precious and rare metal in the world of Lord of the Rings that later becomes Frodo's armor. And yeah, that's a cool little reference, but at the same time, you don't need to give every little thing a backstory. It's the same problem that, Captain Marvel and the Star Wars prequels have, where they explain things that nobody was really asking about. I did like the scene where Durin and Elrond are talking about their fathers. That was a nice little bonding moment because that actually sort of furthers their characters. And there was this really funny moment where Galadriel gets thrown in the dungeon, and the transition to that scene was kind of funny. I got a good chuckle out of that. I will say I did like the villain in this episode. Now, Adar, he does seem kind of an interesting villain. He was acting really well. He was really creepy. He has an evil plan. I'm not sure how I feel about trying to make the orcs sympathetic in this episode, though. These are vicious, bloodthirsty monsters, but you're trying to make us feel bad for them. Another moment in this episode I liked, though, was the moment where Elrond uses elf eyes to read the lips, when they're on the other side of the room. That was a nice little touch. Nice little callback, to elves and kind of how their species works. But, man, I miss the Harfoots. I know there's way too much going on in the show, so you can't show every character, every plotline every week. But, I'm really curious about what they're doing, and they're not in this episode. And that's mostly because this episode was honestly kind of slow. Now, having something slow in and of itself, not necessarily a bad thing as long as you're doing stuff that feels important. But nothing in this episode really felt important. I didn't think there were any big stakes. This episode was honestly kind of filler. There was one maybe exciting little fight scene with some orcs kind of at the beginning of the episode, but overall, I think maybe the pacing of this episode could have been tightened up a bit. I don't really feel like anything major happened. I wasn't really that into this episode this week. I'm sorry. I know I've been particularly positive about this show. I've been very positive about this show so far, but not every show is perfect, and it pains me to say it, but this is the first episode of the show that I just didn't care for. But maybe you have a different opinion. Let me know what you guys thought.